Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Day 2 of Build Station. Remember, this is open now until May 11th. So you can come here whenever you want. Open 24/7. We're on the 2nd floor. There's a little agenda that we put into the group chat as well. So you can book times for the different sessions. So you know what's happening, when to be here. A couple of the fun ones. We've got roasts on Thursday and Friday that we'll look for. And then the whole next week, it's quite fun. We've got different members co-hosting it with us. Today's our security day. So Bok is going to be able to go through some really good things about the OPSEC side of things. You've obviously seen all the big hacks that have been going on recently. So I thought this would be a really timely one to be able to make sure that we can be able to be following the best practices, protecting yourselves and your users for all your different apps. And then later on, Abe will then go a bit more technical and go into the deep code side of things, what you can be doing to best practices as well. So I'll hand it over to Bok to get going. Give a round of applause.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
For any questions?
As I'm sure you all know, but for the people at home, my name is Greg Bok, co-founder, CEO of Fidesium. We are a cybersecurity firm.
Sorry, just before you start, right? You've been pushing this for a while. How does it feel to be able to just stand in front of everyone and go, I told you so. I told you so.
I actually hate it because, I mean, the chance of this killing DeFi is absolutely serious.
Right.
And it just keeps on getting worse and worse.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries, man. So yeah, co-founder, CEO of Fidesium, cybersecurity firm. We've been going for about 3 years. This is much more my background. My co-founder, Abe, will be talking about code in a bit. I'm much more on the process side. And it turns out the process is super important. If you have not been hiding under a rock, the latest stream of hacks, the worst month in crypto in a very long time, have nearly all been OPSEC failures. 600 million drained from audited protocols and audited by some of the big boys. And I mean, that 600 million is what was hacked and liquidated out. The damage to DeFi, I've heard, is in the billions, and the damage to the chains in total. The TVL loss is an absolute frightening amount of money. Audits catch the bugs. They tend to. About 75% of code bugs are caught when a good auditing team gets through, and the contracts end up being pretty safe. But as we all know, contracts drift. New improvements are made, third-party suppliers, something can happen with Oracle. The other 30% is the teams behind, and operations and team behavior is turning out to be a way more fruitful place to attack for sophisticated teams. So the 5 most recent big news hacks, we're just going to briefly go through them, talk about where the mistakes were, and then we'll get to what we can do to kind of head this stuff off. So we had Kelp DAO, which was the big daddy, 293 million. As of today, prices may vary. Drift Protocol, another absolutely abysmal one. And I mean, sophisticated. The step finance, it's frightening because at the end of the day, not terribly sophisticated. Then Truebit, a little bit of a smaller hack, but this one's a bit of a blend, down to a bit of code and a bit of someone was asleep at the wheel. And then there has been a wave of new phishing attacks, and I think it's really important to talk about those. So Kelp DAO, what happened? They had a bad system. Now, I have read reports that this was flagged to Kelp DAO before it happened. They had a one-of-one DNV verifier, and how the hack unfolded was 2 of the oracles were poisoned, and then a sophisticated team carried out a massive DDoS attack on the rest of their oracles in the system. So the verification layer from Kelp DAO only had one place to fall back and grab information, and that was the poisoned oracles. Then they counterfeited messages, minted and cross-chain minted a bunch of stuff that didn't exist, said it was burned on the other side, were able to withdraw those funds because they said they didn't exist on the other side of the chain, ran away with it, ran through. Like, the money laundering part, I care less about. Like, you're never going to be able to do anything about that. Why this matters, the one part that matters about this and where Kelp DAO, this system kind of failed, was that as the funds were being stolen and they're being moved off to poison other funds and steal money from other places, the bridge was left open and unmanned. Like, they were moving funds for like 6 hours, and it was just a huge process break, and that's why so little of the funds were recovered from this particular attack. The drift protocol. Oh man, if anyone ever comes at you this hard, you better have good processes. This is absolutely amazing. So the group, everybody's assuming Lazarus Group, North Korea, put together a team, created a fake company, hired fake actors to go meet the drift team at different conventions, shook hands, built up trust.
Ocean's 11 time.
Seriously,
Yeah.
like, I mean, absolutely mental. The amount of planning and the long game of this attack.
Yeah.
Got friendly with everybody, became a trusted partner, asked them to test software. Asked them to test software. They were able to affect the devs' machines. On the other part of this attack, they created a fake token. The fake token, they wash traded it up to 500 million. Absolutely nothing. Then they used the infected machine, got pre-signatures, went through, used the fake token as collateral, and rinsed them through. Pulled everything out. The collateral they left on system, absolutely fake. Collateral disappears. Drift is left holding the bag and everybody who's part. But the amount of coordination, the level of this attack, months and months and months in the planning, months and months and months in the building, on several fronts, creating the fake, building the trust, coming up with the deploy packages. And this is where the AI comes in. First time where it gets really kind of frightening is AI was used in the deploy packages. They asked them to test an app. The deploy packages had a bit of malware hidden in the deploy package that through no error was not setting off any alarms with usual antivirus. And that's how they compromised the dev machines. Sick attack. Yeah, this was access control failure. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, this is the simple one. This was regular social engineering. They compromised executive devices. This was, I believe, hacked executive device, known contact, and then deployed through a phony meeting. Sorry about that. I advanced when I'm talking about the wrong thing. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Throw me off. Truebit. This is the blended one. This was a minor logic edge case. They had an old version of Solidity deployed with an unchecked integer arithmetic. This is, I put blended because had there been any sort of monitoring on this, this could have been stopped and caught. So what happened was they overflowed the integer. They were allowed to mint and sell a bunch in just a loop. Anything should have caught this, right? Like this amount of minting and selling should have been immediately flagged. They were absolutely asleep at the wheel. This went on for several hours before anybody realized what was going on. And then the last one is just a general about the phishing waves. They are getting pretty intense. Me and Abe have been targeted by a few in recent months. Phony meetings that from what do they call it when the URL is a weird character change? A homoglyph attack. One character changed in a trusted known URL. It is sometimes very hard to spot. There has been a new one where the link it's displayed in Telegram is correct. If you typed it in, you would go to then a non-existent link. But when you click on it, the homoglyph is hidden behind the correct text version of the link.
So it's like a JPEG on top of. And
Yeah. Once I figured it out, the whole text stream got deleted before I could investigate further.
I
But
got an email that Solana Foundation was willing to deploy 50 mil. You're telling me that's a lie?
oh no, you should totally do that. That is another good point. Another one, we got hit by a person in our network, someone we've met at events. His Telegram was compromised. Set us a meeting link. Meeting link shows up. The first iteration was a regular Google Meet with a Google Meet link. A couple hours before the meeting, the meeting is updated, and then there's a link with a homoglyph attack. And then this one was particularly interesting because the homoglyph attack in this case went to a site that did not contain malware. But when you tried to enter the meeting, I don't know how they did this either, but they spoofed, tunneled through to spoof the meeting software. They added something on where it throws an error that says, oh, enter this or click here to correct the problem with your microphone. And that's where the payload's deployed. So, I mean, they are getting just absolutely insane. Yep.
Something similar happened to myself and my team when someone approached us on X to do a podcast. How they do it is that when, because it's basically requesting permission. I don't know if it's kind of what you're explaining, but this is what it sounds like. Because they get explicit permission to access, stuff on the microphone, stuff on the camera. There's actually a JS script. That's the payload. The payload is the JS script that gets downloaded onto your machine because you've technically given permission.
Right.
To that JS
So they're
script
yeah.
to get access to your machine, and then they'll get access to it, and then basically all your files are done.
Yep.
That's that. I don't know if that's.
It's similar. This is more of a root level, so this is going into your command line and actually installing a package on the computer instead of just going through the browser. But
so
the end result is, the same. All right. All 5 of these, I mean, looking back, generally, you can always say any hack was preventable, but these are kind of gratuitously preventable for the size of hack they were. And how you got to think about it is OPSEC is its own code. It is its own set of operating procedures. It is its own way of doing things. And having this correct is what protects you. So OPSEC in the Web3 terms, the human and process layer is what OPSEC is. It's how we interact. It's what we take care of. It's what we pay attention to. It's how we respond to things. And it has a kind of one-to-one for dangers in code, right? When we talk about code, we talk about the attack surface. How many points do you hit? How many places are you vulnerable? And this is the same thing. If your treasury can be drained by a single key hack or loss or compromise, same as a world-ending bug. It doesn't matter, and it shouldn't be that way. The reason why it matters more now, more often than not, the code on your projects is going to be largely immutable. New novel exploits can come up, but they're getting more rare. The more faster we move, the more we fix. Web3 security, all security is an arms race. The defenders get better. The attackers find new ways to attack. Operations change every day. People in your company, how you react to your story. You got busy. It was just a time of day. Usually you're pretty good. But, all of us have a moment, a little bit of brain fog, and that can go down. attackers are now really pressing on the weakest link. People, especially people who aren't trained in this kind of adversarial thinking, are kind of easier targets. And so far, especially for April, most of these attacks were almost completely operational. So the 3 layers of Web3 OPSEC. First is design. What is your architect decision? Like, what is your company architecture look for? Where are the weak points? How many places are you exposed? Governance topology. How many people are allowed to interact with the wallets, the keys, big decision bits, make signatures? And then your failure landscape. So if governance topology is on the top, the failure landscape is on the below. On the below, how many places where failure just cripples and ends you completely. Layer 2 is thinking about your processes, your signing flow, your change management, your vendor reviews, the Kelp DAO, due largely to the layer reliance on layer 0. This gets really, really, really dangerous. The more third parties you deal with to make your project work, the deeper you have to go, and really audit everyone in your chain. And this gets very time consuming, very dangerous, and breeds a whole another layer of trustless dangers. And then your incident response. Some of these had very good incident response. They found it. They tried to stop on some levels, and then the other levels, like the bridging, fell down and was left to go for hours. And these things spiraled out of control. So, I mean, really playing this out is very important when you're deciding on the process of, okay, something bad happens. What bad thing happened? What do we do about it? How do we respond about it? How do we minimize damage if it happens? And it can't just be a on paper theory. It really has to be played through. It's the only way you're going to find the weaknesses. And then layer 3 is having an idea about the risk posture of your infrastructure. How many RPC nodes are you hitting? Is it distributed enough? Can they all be attacked at once? Are all your devices safed? Are your important devices air-gapped? Who is in custody of your keys? How many signatures does it take to unlock or transfer funds? Do you have enough spread on that the odds of everybody being attacked at the same time is, vanishingly small? Monitoring, alerting, and telemetry. This was another thing that in these past couple hacks was a very, very big problem. The monitoring wasn't there. There was absolutely insanely suspicious activity going on, and it was not flagged up in several of the cases. There was no alerting to the proper authorities, so things didn't get shut off or circuit broke, and the telemetry was non-existent. So the 5 rules, no exceptions. Hardware wallets only for treasury keys. I mean, this is just true of everything. This one's interesting, which I think everybody should learn. No pre-signed approvals ever.
That's what the durable nonsense do, isn't it?
And this is why I think Abe will dive down deeper. That is, I get where you're going. I will have Abe mention that in his. It is a bit beyond me.
What's the questions that you mentioned?
Durable nonsense.
So the second point said no pre-signed approvals ever, but isn't that the whole point of a durable nonce?
I think then you could argue that a durable nonsense is not a pre-signed approval. It's their solution to it, but
You sign the approval, it's just off-chain, and then it activates on-chain when the parameters are met.
okay.
So you have no involvement. You've signed it, and as long as whatever the parameters are, as long as they're met, it will activate and sign.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Quarterly access reviews with rotation. This would have absolutely saved drift. When a confidence scan like this is being run, the players were only dealing with certain members of the team, had a quarterly review and rotation of checking gone through. this could have been easily sidestepped before it even started. Zero trust IPSCs and verifiers, multiple independent. Obviously, this is where distributed comes in. The more of them there are, and the more places you have to fall back, less chance of a DDoS attack or a poison pill coming in. And then simulate every signature before executing, especially on large transactions. And so the fact that there was none of this built into a couple of these hacks where like absolutely insanely massive funds were allowed to be moved with no monitoring, no checking, no alerts. Pretty sad. So SOC 2 is a U.S. framework. The international framework is ISO 27001. SOC 2 makes a bit more sense for Web3 just because it's a bit more operational. You can do a moment in time version, which is a bit cheaper for early projects and at least get you thinking in the right way. And so what it is the 5 trust service criteria: security, availability, confidentiality, process integrity, and privacy. So type 1 is just a snapshot of your company and make sure you're thinking about some of this stuff in the right way. It looks like it looks to make sure you can have it set up. Type 2 checks back at interval and it makes sure your processes are functioning. Type 2 is more expensive, but it is more durable and gives a better estimation of your security posture. So, how it closes the gap. Enforce change management with improvement in approvals and audit trails, so you know who's making decisions, who's allowed to make decisions, and who has made decisions. Vendor and third-party risk reviews, we kind of covered. Incident response rehearsed, not theoretical. This is very important, and for some teams, it seems a bit silly the first time you do it, but you will never find the hiccups in your flows if everybody just reads a brief and it's like, oh, if this hack happens, John talks to Jack, Jack talks to Jill, Jill turns off the system. It sounds great, but then a simple run-through test. Jack doesn't have Jill's phone number. Jill doesn't have the access to the room to turn it off. You know, when you actually role play these things through, it seems like a kid's game, but it really, really quickly exposes flaws, and it's very, very important. Access controls with provable evidence, pretty self-explanatory, and continuous monitoring, not point-in-time attestation. So everybody can fake this once, right? You're doing a security briefing with your team. Is this the way it is? Everybody can go back, run to their desk, whip up a document and say, yes, this is how I always do it. And then the next week, they're just sending the private keys across the Slack network so someone can transfer some money for lunch. And not great. Drift and Kelp replay. So Drift, yeah. Access control and signer rotation would have headed this off before it even became a problem. And then with Kelp, this is the interesting one. So SOC 2 vendor review would have shown the one-of-one verifier DVN was a point of weakness. I have heard mixed reports on this as the forensics have gone through, and it seems like Kelp was made aware of this being a problem, and they chose to ignore it as a possible world-ending flaw. And that did not work out for them. So your take home, 5 actions take home this quarter. Treat OPSEC as a product feature. Bake it into your culture. The earlier you start thinking about this and the more serious you start taking this aspect of security, when you bake it in from the beginning, it gets easier and easier. If you try to go reverse engineer it once your team has like a set of behaviors, it is very, very, very hard to put in. read through the SOC 2 verification process. It is just a lot of good information. In fact, Fidesium will be releasing a high-level breakdown for free. Will be downloadable soon. Type 1 first, especially if you're a small team. It's really kind of all you need to start with. Type 2 to make sure you're keeping up on the processes. Once you start growing and you start having a bunch of funds under management, probably pretty important. As much as possible, eliminate single human points of failure. It just makes you unbelievably vulnerable in all over the world in every company. This is just called key man risk, and they offer insurance for it. Don't know what the insurance landscape is for a single point of failure. I think they just wouldn't let you have it and probably wouldn't insure it. Don't do it. Simulate attacks quarterly. I was talking about before about doing some role play and getting through, going through the process of what an attack looks like, how your team actually responds. You need to keep this up. I've worked at companies before where we have even built tabletop games to see how people move through the office, made our own action cards, made sure people played the right action cards. It is a really good thing to do as your team gets bigger, especially as you're onboarding new people. Security procedures get set. Turning it into a game is a great teaching tool. Pair every code audit with continuous process validation. So every time you release new functionality in your code, you have an audit. It bears thinking about how that change in how your protocol project works is going to affect your team and what might happen if there is a world-ending attack. Code secures the contract. OPSEC and SEC 2 secure the treasury. While there can be zero-day bugs that can drain kind of everything, that is what's on in the protocol. SOC 2 process security protects the bags you take off of that. It protects the bags used to run your business. And this is really important, and this is what we're seeing a lot more of lately, and AI is just making it go faster. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
A little bit of a warm-up. So there has been actually attacks like this in the past, right? And the reason that was a problem is that an unchecked account doesn't actually validate that you own the account that you're passing, right? So you're free to pass whatever you want. And the require check that it had on the slide initially, all it actually does is validate public keys. Public keys are by definition public. So if you don't collect a signature, an attacker passes an account they control. And so I didn't spend a huge amount looking for more recent attacks. This is just the one that came to mind immediately. It's a couple years old now. But this is a very traditional attack vector that many protocols have been stung by to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, right? And as we just discussed, literally a single check was missing. So I'm going to run through kind of 6 questions that I think you should be asking anytime you're building anything in Solana. Run through some footguns, kind of things that you might run afoul of even if you ask these questions. And then talk about good process. There will be code samples, although not on every slide. So they are, who can call this? What does this account actually contain? What am I trusting and why? What happens if this runs twice, out of order, or partially? Does my code and my comments align? And what am I assuming, generally? What invariants do I believe to hold? What is true in my world, in my view of the world? So this is a slightly more pinned down version of what we just covered, right? The top one's a problem, the bottom one's a solution, right? You pass an unchecked account authority, you're allowing the attacker to provide any account that they like. You provide a signer's authority, you're enforcing the attacker actually controls signature authority on that account. However, you're not actually enforcing it as the account that you're expecting it to be. That's where has1 comes in. The important distinction here is that any one of these in and of itself is insufficient. And if you use account info or an unchecked account, you're explicitly opting out of all of this. You're opting for a permissionless view of the world. There are scenarios where this is what you want. You should ask yourself if those scenarios apply to your case, just as a rule. So the other thing here is, in a nutshell, deserializing an account and validating what's in it is not actually the same thing, right? Just because you've told the compiler that something is an account of type mint, you validated it, the owner, the discriminator, the value of it. You've not actually validated that it's the one you expect it to be, right? So you're not checking this is the account I'm expecting. You're just checking the account matches the type, the shape, the type system, the compiler to the thing I want it to be, right? As a rule, you probably won't has1s. And this is where the cashier bug lived. This is what they missed. Now, in Solana, we often interface with the wider world, right? Accounts are different programs that you interact with. Every time you talk to an oracle, to an admin, to some infrastructure, anytime you make a CPI call, there are implicit trust assumptions that you are making. So encode them, right? If you're expecting something to be a token, tell the compiler you expect it to be a token. If you tell the compiler you're expecting an unchecked account, you're leaving a surface open. Now, this is actually, so the above are all kind of almost table stakes, right? I would assume that most of the people in this room have to some extent thought of most of that, right? Now, this is where we've seen in our life as an auditor, people miss stuff, right? And this example here is obviously fairly vanilla flavored, right? It has to fit on a slide. But the key question you should always be asking is, what happens if the thing you expect to be called is called in a different order, if it succeeds partially, if it's reordered, and are you cleaning up after yourself? Are you leaving yourself open to revival attacks of some flavor, right? So in this specific example, right, what's happening is that the approved amount isn't reducing. That's obviously pretty, well, obvious. But as a general rule, what would happen if the thing you're being called was called again? Would your system handle it? What would happen if the thing you're being called that you think happens before some other thing or after is called in a different order? How would your program behave? Because I promise you, there are people out there who are going to ask these questions, and some of them live in North Korea. Or other locations. Not to be offensive. Yeah, fair. And I mean, this is honestly just a code smell. This is not in and of itself a problem, right? But does your code and your comments agree to each other, right? Now, obviously, the code is truth. But when we are reviewing people's code, if we notice things like this, so in this case, you say that fee is capped, but it isn't. So that might not be a problem, but that certainly demonstrates drift between planned implementation and real implementation, and it's worth questioning. Just as you're reviewing your code, as you're looking at what you've written, compare what you've commented against what you've written, especially, I'm sure some of y'all vibe code. No shame, I do. This is where you notice it lying. This is how you identify that it's made shit up, because it'll comment stuff and it'll build something else. And one of them is true. And if the code is right, great, fix the comments. Quite often that's not the way it goes. And the last one is, and this is really the meat and potatoes of what we do, what any auditor will do. What are your invariants? What ground truths are you assuming about the world? How do you know that they are in fact true? And what would happen if they weren't? So these are all drawn from real findings we found in protocols we've audited, right? You assume prices are fresh. What happens if your Oracle is stale? How does your program behave if your Oracle feeds are out of date? you assume the clock is monotonic, right? You assume that time only moves forward. I mean, timestamps can drift, right? What happens when they do? And, liquidity exists. I mean, that one's quite self-evident, depending on where you're at in your protocol lifecycle, that A, might just not be true. And B, even if it is, flash crashes are a thing. Different assets will have different order book depths. Counterparties rational is an interesting one because a lot of protocols we speak to tend to assume that things only matter if there is gain to be had by an attacker. And that is generally true, but not necessarily, right? It is entirely possible that somebody decides to denial of service a particular pool in your protocol at a loss because they can. This has happened in the past. It will happen again. Not every counterparty is a rational actor. Now, how irrational they're likely to be is obviously a question, right? Like if the cost to DOS your protocol runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe you're fine. But if an attacker's losing a fraction of a dollar per block, worthy of consideration. And the last one is, and this happens a lot, your internal accounting and the actual financial state of your ecosystem might not be one and the same. And while that is rarely immediately exploitable, what it can result over the long term is kind of slow motion financial collapse, right? You have less liquidity, less assets than you think you do. If you're tracking state in separate places, if you have two different things that manage financial data, one for internal viewing layers and one for actual ops, make sure they are synced. That's it. And when I say make sure, I mean write tests to prove that they are.
Does the timestamping become more more of an issue when you move into programs just because it doesn't use blocks don't mean not timestamp contracts? Is that more easy to exploit than normal?
So yes, but not by much, to be honest. The tricky thing is that you won't know when and where they drift either way, right?
Yeah,
so you kind of have to assume at every point where you're interacting with timestamps that there is a probability that at some point they will drift, and your system just needs to be hardened against that, right? They're slightly easier to exploit at the program level, but honestly, that's, I would argue, the wrong framing.
Yeah.
Just assume timestamps are not in fact monotonic would be my advice.
It says account. It doesn't say surely that's to say destination signer.
That's it. That's the one. And the concerning thing about this is, right, it looks like it should work, right? You've in fact checked the signer on the user right there, right? It looks right. It will compile fine. It will run file. And most of the time, under regular conditions, if you're testing happy path, this will work fine.
Yeah, I was going to say,
right.
Methodically, it would make sense, but it just doesn't specifically define.
Yeah. And these are the kinds of gaps that just you need to be aware of when you're building smart contracts in general, but in Solana especially, because there's the CPI interfaces, every single trust assumption needs to be checked. If you're not explicitly validating a thing you're interacting with, even if you've written it, even if the thing you're interacting with is a thing you wrote, assume it's poison. Let's talk about some more foot guns. All right. Why did it just do that? Anyway, let's talk about some foot guns. There we go. So the above is like a loose framework of questions that you can ask yourself as you're building and kind of honestly rule out a lot of the more common problems. But there are still some foot guns here, right? So some of them we've already covered, but it's worth drilling into again, right? So always check your owners, always check your signers, always check your discriminators. This is very, very common in non-Anchor Solana code. If you are using Anchor, you get discriminator checks largely for free. If you're, for whatever reason, building in raw Solana, you do not. Just because an account deserializes does not mean it's the account you think it's going to be. Check your discriminators by hand. And the reason is, so the Borch deserialization is fundamentally positional. So it'll check that the positions align what you think they're going to be. It's not going to actually check that they are correct. I mean, we've talked about this. As a general rule, account info indicates a trustless surface. You probably don't want one. There are exceptions. And anytime you're validating anything, to require keys or otherwise, one side of the thing you're validating needs to be provided by you. If you're comparing two things, both of which an attacker can pass in, you're not proving anything, right? So on the PDA side, there's a bunch of stuff, right? So first of all, just be aware that seed collision is a thing. If you're generating PDAs, make sure that you discriminate between them, because otherwise you can produce the same PDA from different inputs. Bumps can be ground. They're actually only limited, I think, up to 255. So use a canonical bump, the problem goes away. Do it yourself. This is going to be a theme here. While there are some reasons, some valid reasons, why you might not want to use Anchor and why you might want to hand roll stuff, if you find yourself doing it, make sure you can quantify it, because many of these problems, not all of them, many, just go away if you don't. Such as, if you manage your own bump estate, you are open to it being ground. If you just use the canonical bump, you aren't. Yeah, make sure that you check the program you're interacting with. That's it, really. Anchor constraints can actually lie. So the big one here is init if needed. Make sure that if you're calling init if needed, you actually validate the thing being initted. A general rule of thumb is if the thing already exists and gets re-initted, can you prove that that is a no-op? If you cannot prove that it is a no-op, you probably shouldn't be using init if needed. What else? Yeah, so close equals recipient. We touched on this a minute ago, right? If you're manually closing accounts rather than relying on Anchor, your discriminators aren't zeroed. You can end up with zombie revivals. Anchor's account validation doesn't actually validate token 2022 extensions, which has second order effects, which we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, so every time that you interact with another program, this is, again, I know I'm repeating myself, this is where all the really bad shit happens. If you're interacting, if you're doing CPI, if you're doing cross-program unification, validate everything, right? If you don't validate the token program, an attacker chooses what the token program is, right? If you have any remaining accounts, just know Anchor validates literally nothing. You need to. CPI can actually provide like Ethereum-style reentrancy. If the CPI you're talking with then does a CPI out to you, you can quite literally have reentrancy. And yeah, I mean, if you're doing zero copy borrows, I've got questions. But just know that if you are doing zero copy borrows, you can end up with stale state or undefined behavior, which largely just means a crash, but not necessarily. Arithmetic. I don't know where all y'all's background is from. I know that mine, in a past life was JavaScript land. I think the important thing to note is that Rust does underflow and overflow. And this can have very real world problems if you're relying on those values to mean anything, let alone if you're relying on them for financial computation. The really, really big one is, and I'll share these slides later, right? I'll send them out. I know I'm kind of doing a bit of a whirlwind tour. And just think about your account lifecycle, right? In general, an account in Solana space will go through phases, right? It doesn't exist, then it exists, then it's active, then it's closed, then it's gone. Now, you might notice that there are states here which, for a running program, often don't matter. A closed account is gone, right? You don't care about it. That's where a lot of relatively sophisticated attacks hide. The important really thing here to think about is, in fact, that one. Because within the same block, basically before the garbage collector actually collects the account, if an attacker sends LAMP ports back to that account, they reinitialize it, and now, at best, your accounting state and your real state have drifted because an account exists in your system that carries some economic value you're no longer tracking. Best case scenario, right? And at worst, they then use this account for more nefarious purposes, substitute it somewhere else where you're missing a signer check, yada, 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 and cascade out to whatever, to value drain of some flavor. So just think about this when you're handling accounts. Remember they go through intermediate stages. Just because you're not using it yet or anymore doesn't mean an attacker couldn't. And again, strongly advise you don't do that. Just rely on Anchor. Oracles, fun. We've found a lot of issues with several clients here. So a few things to think about, right? First of all, what happens if the data is stale? And stale in two places, right? Checking when you ingest the data and checking when you use it are important, because just because the data was fresh when it was ingested doesn't mean it's still fresh when it was used, depending on the internals of your system. You should think about whose side is being protected, right? Are you protecting the protocol or your user? There isn't actually a right answer to that question, by the way, but it's something it should be a conscious decision, right? Rather than just kind of going with it. Because if you make it a conscious decision, you think through the surface and you think through what that means for your protocol, and you handle negative outcomes, right? As a general rule, we recommend multi-oracle consensus. Just if you're relying on a single oracle, you're signing up for problems anyway. But if you do have multiple oracles, a question is, well, what if backups are stale? What if some of the oracles you're relying on, but not all of them are stale? Do you allow the price to go into your system? How do you handle it? What does your fallback look like? If you're relying on a DEX as an oracle, I mean, kind of self-explanatory. If you use a DEX price as an oracle feed, which we've seen people do, it is in some ways quite easy, but a flash loan on a thin pool means that your price is whatever that particular DEX says. And again, timestamps can drift, timestamps can be laundered. Just because a signature is valid does not mean that the truth is current. Always assume a timestamp can drift and consider what will happen if it does. Token 2022. So look, Token 2022 is a format. It comes with its own flavors of issues. Now, in general, look, you permanently delegate authority on tokens to a different entity. You have transfer fees on the tokens. They can be interest-bearing. They can be non-transferable. The general recommendation here is this. Look, unless you are specifically building for Token 2022 standards for a reason you can justify, just reject them. So if you're running a DEX, a lending protocol, or whatever, either actively consider this format and build for it, or actively exclude it. And in most cases, you probably want to actively exclude it. because while I think it's cool, off the top of my head, I cannot actually name a single meaningful implementation.
I think the only use cases for token 22 are people launching tokens on pump fund trying to get the edge on
Yes,
alpha.
yes. I think it's a cool thing. I think it's a cool concept. But as a rule, just excluded. It's literally one line of code to do so. Okay, so that's largely it. There's one more section here about kind of process and what you can do to keep yourself safe against all of the above, right? So, and some of this gets into a little bit into how we work as an auditor, and some of this gets into things you can do yourself. The line is always somewhat blurry. So, look, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of key principles here. Obviously, I'm sure everyone in this room writes lots and lots of unit tests for their financial load-bearing protocols. Just a general guide, if you're writing a test, write a negative test. So you're asserting something is true, assert that the inverse is false explicitly, right? So let's say you've got only authority can close, right? And you've got a test. When the authority calls it, the thing gets closed. You should also write a test that asserts that if somebody who isn't the authority close it, they can't, right? And just apply that to every single test you're writing, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you've missed. That's how you find it. If you are doing your own fuzzing, fuzz your invariants, not your functions, right? Like don't fuzz that a specific function, when called, always does a thing. That's meaningless. What you want to actually figure out is what are the truths that you assert about your system. I don't know. If somebody adds value into a pool, the total pool value only goes up, right? Like, I don't know. Pick your invariants. They will vary based on your protocol. You should be able to express them as a simple mathematical formula, and that's what you want your fuzzer to test. When you're writing tests, don't just write unit tests. Actually compose multiple operations. Run sequences of operations, and not just the obvious ones. What happens if, I don't know, somebody tries to withdraw before they've deposited? I don't know. Well, like, what would happen, right? And just as a rule, if you do find a bug and you don't write a regression test, the bug will come back. I promise you. So, when should you get an audit? When should you come and talk to us? I mean, the best time is now, right? Come talk to us now. We'll figure it out. Otherwise, before your next major release, right? Whenever you're planning on releasing something, you should probably have somebody take a look at it. Why? Well, A, because we do this for a living and we've seen a lot of protocols, we found a lot of shit. And B, because human beings make mistakes. You're an interested party. You've built the code. You trust yourself. You believe yourself to be very clever. I believe you to be very clever, but you don't know what you don't see, right? And we have spoken to a couple of people who come to us after an incident, which is it's great. That is the hardest possible way to learn that you need one. Like,
at the start, at the very start, there was the 70% code-based errors, and then 30% was human behavior and other stuff.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually having an audit, so for example, you said that before the next feature, so obviously some protocols and some, especially in the DeFi stuff and other places, will be doing updates constantly.
Yeah.
How valid does that audit stay for once they start to get deeper into their different versions?
It's a great question. So it depends on your audit, and it depends on what you're changing. So as a general kind of sniff test, so first of all, us as an auditor, we provide you with our regression suite, right? Like, so as part of the engagement, we would build you a set of tests that assert all the things we found, so that you can at least know that things that we found in the past haven't broken. Depending on the tier, right? Like it's a thing we can provide. So if you have an auditor that does something like that, and there are others, we are not a special snowflake in that sense, then you have a little bit more runway, just because you don't just have a piece of paper, you have some automated assertions. Failing that, the sniff test is, well, we've got a list, we've got like 15 different things, but the two big ones are, does your new stuff change any invariants? Right, like, so are any invariants that used to be true no longer true? If that's true, you probably should talk to an auditor again. And the second one is, are you introducing any new account classes, new PDAs entirely?
And then I guess just a follow-on question to that, sorry, is so say for example if, this is a generic question towards like all the teams in general, once you've got your audit done, I think one of the hardest parts for startups is the funding for an audit, because some of them tend to be quite expensive,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how big the scope is. If you were to pivot slightly, or you was to create changes, and you went back to the same auditing company, would you be paying a full audit price, or could we just give you the code base and see the commits?
So it depends on the auditor. I cannot speak for auditors in general. In fact, I know for a fact that there are some big name auditors that would charge you full price again. I know for a fact because some of their customers are now our customers. We do not. It's only a negotiated relationship, but we do provide like a retainery service where if you are changing less than a number of lines of code, we charge you significantly less. Right. So a couple further resources if you want to do some additional research. There's a GitHub repo called Coral XYZ Sea-Level Attacks, which documents many common attack vectors, not all of them. Neodyme are the OG in the Solana auditing space, and their blog contains some pretty in-depth walkthroughs of some interesting stuff. Obviously, like any auditor, they're not going to tell you everything they've ever found. There's, privacy concerns, NDAs, and also they're still running a business. It's a good blog. The Anchor book is great. It talks through how Anchor works. It talks through some of the reasons why I kept saying that unless you have a very, very good reason, you should probably just use Anchor.
Who defined the standard of Anchor?
I actually don't know. I don't know. I don't know who defined it. I would have thought the Solana Foundation, but I don't know.
Okay.
Anchor? Yeah, who built it? I would have thought the Solana Foundation, but I actually don't know.
No, it was a backpack founder.
Backpack. Okay, fine.
Okay.
And talk to us. If you have questions, if you just want to bounce ideas around, we're not going to charge you for